Everyone knows Ecuador for the Galapagos and the equator, but what if I told you it's the only country where nature itself has legal rights like a human being? Wait until you find out there's a tribe that practiced headhunting until the 1960s, and you won't believe how Ecuador became the world's banana empire. Number 15. Ecuador is the only country in the world where nature itself can legally sue humans in court. Ecuador's 2008 constitution became the first in the world to recognize legally enforceable rights of nature, meaning rivers, forests, and ecosystems have the same legal standing as human beings, and can be represented by lawyers in lawsuits. You heard right. If a mining company pollutes a river, that river can literally take them to court and win millions in damages, just like a person would. This isn't just symbolic environmental language. Ecuadorian courts have already ruled in favor of nature over 30 times, ordering companies to pay billions in restoration costs and shutting down major industrial projects. Picture this surreal courtroom scene, lawyers arguing on behalf of a rainforest against oil executives, with judges issuing legal verdicts that treat trees and animals as plaintiffs with constitutional rights. The constitutional framework incorporates indigenous concepts like Pachamama, creating a legal system where ecosystems become persons capable of owning property and demanding protection. Think environmentalism is just about protests and petitions? In Ecuador, Mother Nature herself can hire attorneys, file lawsuits, and win court cases that force multinational corporations to respect her rights or face criminal prosecution. Number 14. Ecuador produces more bananas than any other country on Earth, exporting over 6.5 million tons annually, despite being smaller than Colorado. Ecuador represents 22% of total world banana exports and 27% of the country's total agricultural exports, making this tiny nation the undisputed banana capital of the planet. You won't believe how this agricultural dominance started. Ecuador's unique geography creates perfect banana-growing conditions year-round, with consistent temperatures, volcanic soil, and precise rainfall that makes Ecuadorian bananas grow faster and taste sweeter than anywhere else. The banana industry employs over 2.5 million Ecuadorians directly or indirectly, meaning 1 in 6 citizens depends on banana production for their livelihood. Ecuador is the only country in the world to impose a mandatory minimum official price to be paid to banana farmers, protecting small producers from exploitation by massive multinational fruit companies. Picture vast green plantations stretching to the horizon, with workers harvesting millions of perfectly curved yellow fruits that will appear in grocery stores from New York to Tokyo within 14 days. Here's the mind-blowing part. Russia is actually Ecuador's largest banana customer, importing over $757 million worth annually, meaning Russian breakfast tables depend more on Ecuadorian agriculture than most people realize. The banana industry generates over $3.2 billion annually for Ecuador, making these humble yellow fruits more economically important than oil in some years. Number 13. The Shuar people of Ecuador were the last tribe in the Americas to practice headhunting, continuing this ritual until the late 1960s. The Shuar warriors would shrink the heads of their enemies into fist-sized zanza trophies through an elaborate process involving removing the skull, boiling the skin in special herbs, and filling it with hot sand and stones until it resembled a miniature preserved face with real hair and features still intact. You heard right. While Americans were watching the moon landing on TV, Ecuadorian warriors were still collecting shrunken heads as spiritual trophies to capture their enemies' souls and prevent revenge from beyond the grave. This wasn't random violence, it was sophisticated psychological warfare where displaying shrunken heads demonstrated a warrior's power and protected their family from supernatural retaliation. The process took over 6 days of ritual preparation, with specific ceremonies and taboos that had been passed down through generations for over 1,000 years. The Shuar were the first indigenous people in Latin America to establish a formal indigenous organization, ironically becoming political pioneers while maintaining ancient warrior traditions. Think this is ancient history? Museums worldwide still display authentic Shuar Sansa, though many are now being repatriated to Ecuador as sacred cultural artifacts. The practice only ended when Christian missionaries and the Ecuadorian government offered modern weapons in exchange for abandoning headhunting, making the Shuar one of the last traditional warrior societies to transition into the modern world. Number 12. Ecuador sits directly on the equator, but the capital city Quito has never recorded a temperature above 84 degrees Fahrenheit or 29 degrees Celsius due to its extreme altitude of 9,350 feet above sea level. This creates the bizarre situation where you can stand on the exact middle of the Earth and, well, need a winter jacket, making Quito one of the few equatorial cities where locals wear sweaters year-round and have never experienced tropical heat. You won't believe how this affects daily life. Visitors expecting equatorial heat arrive in shorts and t-shirts, only to discover they're shivering in spring-like temperatures that never vary more than 10 degrees throughout the entire year. The altitude is so extreme that water boils at 194 degrees Fahrenheit instead of 212, making cooking times completely different and causing altitude sickness in tourists who underestimate the thin air at nearly 2 miles above sea level. Picture the surreal experience of standing at latitude 0 degrees, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, the exact center of the Earth, while watching your breath create visible vapor in cool mountain air that feels more like Denver than the Amazon. Here's the wild part. You can literally drive 30 minutes downhill from Quito and experience a 20-degree temperature increase as you descend into truly tropical climate zones, making Ecuador one of the few countries where equatorial and temperate climates exist just minutes apart. Some Quiteños have lived their entire lives at the equator without ever experiencing the heat that most people associate with equatorial regions, creating a unique cultural perspective where tropical means going to the coast or descending to lower elevations. Number 11. Ecuador uses the US dollar as its official currency, making it the largest economy in the world to completely abandon its national currency in favor of American money. In 2000, Ecuador made the dramatic decision to eliminate the sucre and adopt the US dollar after hyperinflation reached 96% annually, destroying people's savings and making their national currency essentially worthless. You heard right. An entire South American nation threw away its monetary sovereignty and now depends on American Federal Reserve policies for their economic stability, making Ecuador more economically tied to the United States than some U.S. territories. This dollarization experiment has created weird economic situations where Ecuadorians can travel to the U.S. without currency exchange, but they have no control over monetary policy affecting their daily lives. The transition required physically importing billions of US dollar bills and coins, with massive cargo planes delivering American currency to replace 25,000 sucres that had become worth just $1. Think this sounds simple? Ecuador had to negotiate with the US Federal Reserve to ensure adequate supply of physical dollar bills, creating a unique dependency where American printing presses directly control Ecuador's money supply. Here's the strange result. Ecuador has become one of the most stable economies in South America precisely because they surrendered control of their currency, with inflation dropping from 96% to under 4% within 5 years of dollarization. Number 10. The Galapagos Islands belong to Ecuador despite being 600 miles away from the mainland, and the government maintains such strict population controls that you need special permits just to live there. All of the Galapagos Islands are protected as part of Ecuador's Galapagos National Park and Marine Reserve, with only 25,000 people allowed permanent residency on these evolution-famous islands, making it harder to move to the Galapagos than to immigrate to most countries. You won't believe how restrictive these controls are. Even Ecuadorian citizens need government approval to relocate to the islands, with authorities conducting background checks, financial reviews and interviews to determine if applicants can live sustainably without damaging the ecosystem. The population control system is so strict that children born on the Galapagos don't automatically get the right to stay permanently. They must apply for residency permits like foreign immigrants, and many young Galapagos have to leave their birthplace permanently when they turn 18. The islands host some of the highest levels of endemism anywhere on the planet, with about 80% of land birds, 97% of reptiles and land mammals, and more than 30% of plants found nowhere else on Earth, making them a living laboratory so precious that Ecuador treats them like a national treasure with armed guards. Picture this dystopian scenario. You can be born on these magical islands where Darwin developed evolution theory, grow up swimming with sea lions and giant tortoises, but get kicked out of paradise by your own government if you can't prove you're economically valuable to the ecosystem. Here's the controversial part. This population control system has worked so well that the Galapagos remains one of the world's most pristine environments, but it's also created a two-tier citizenship system where some Ecuadorians have fewer rights than others based on geography. Number 9. Ecuador is home to the world's most biodiverse square kilometer, with over 644 tree species in just 1 hectare of Yasuni National Park, more plant diversity than exists in all of North America. This single patch of Amazonian rainforest contains more tree species in an area smaller than 2 football fields than can be found across the entire United States and Canada combined, making it the biological epicenter of planet Earth, where evolution has created the most complex ecosystem ever discovered. You heard right. Scientists have identified over 100,000 insect species per hectare in Yasuni, meaning you could spend your lifetime cataloging the creatures living in an area you can walk across in 5 minutes and still not identify every species present. The biodiversity is so extreme that new species are discovered almost weekly, with over 600 bird species, 200 mammal species, and countless undescribed insects living in concentrations that boggle the mind of biologists worldwide. The area sits on top of massive oil reserves, with 1.5 billion barrels of crude oil underneath this biological treasure, creating an agonizing choice between environmental preservation and economic development that affects Ecuador's entire future. Picture walking through this green cathedral where every tree hosts dozens of plant species, every branch teems with colorful birds and insects, and every step reveals creatures that exist nowhere else in the universe. It's like visiting an alien planet that happens to be located in Ecuador. Here's the heartbreaking part. This biological paradise sits on top of oil worth over $100 billion, and Ecuador's economy desperately needs that revenue, creating an environmental dilemma that could destroy the world's most diverse ecosystem to pay for schools, hospitals, and infrastructure that Ecuador's people desperately need. Number 8. In Ecuador's Amazon, there are indigenous tribes that have never had contact with the outside world, and the government has created intangible zones where it's illegal for outsiders to enter. The Tagairi and Taromanane peoples live in voluntary isolation deep in the rainforest, maintaining Stone Age lifestyles while surrounded by a modern world they've actively chosen to avoid, making them some of the last truly free humans on Earth. You won't believe how seriously Ecuador protects these isolated peoples. The government has established 700,000-hectare exclusion zones where any unauthorized entry can result in prison sentences, and military patrols use satellite monitoring to prevent contact that could destroy these cultures through disease or cultural contamination. These uncontacted tribes still hunt with spears and blowguns, live in traditional longhouses, and follow ancient spiritual practices that predate Christianity, Islam, or Buddhism, representing unbroken human traditions stretching back thousands of years. The isolation policy exists because historical contact with outsiders has been catastrophic for indigenous peoples, with disease outbreaks killing up to 90% of previously isolated populations within decades of first contact. Picture satellite images showing virgin rainforest where small clearings reveal thatched roofs and garden plots of people who have never seen an airplane, used metal tools, or heard about the internet, smartphones, or space travel. Here's the ethical dilemma. These people have the right to remain isolated, but they also live on land containing valuable resources, and some human rights activists argue that preventing contact violates their right to choose their own development path. Ecuador's policy treats these indigenous territories as sovereign nations within the nation, where different human societies coexist in the same geographic space but completely different centuries of technological development. Number 7. Ecuador's mountains are so tall and tectonically active that the country's highest peak, Chimborazo, is actually the farthest point from Earth's center due to the planet's equatorial bulge. At 20,564 feet above sea level, Chimborazo's summit is 6,384.4 kilometers from the Earth's center, making it 2 kilometers farther from the planet's core than Mount Everest's peak, even though Everest is technically 8,700 feet taller when measured from sea level. You heard right. If you want to get as far away from the center of the Earth as possible, you don't climb Everest. You climb this Ecuadorian volcano that most people have never heard of, but is literally the closest point to outer space on the entire planet. This happens because Earth isn't perfectly round. It's an oblate spheroid that bulges at the equator due to rotational forces, making equatorial mountains extend farther into space than polar peaks, creating a counterintuitive geography where smaller mountains can be higher than famous giants. The mountain is so massive and isolated that it creates its own weather patterns, with glaciers existing just 1 degree south of the equator, in a tropical zone where you'd expect palm trees and beaches instead of ice and snow. Picture standing on Chimborazo's summit and realizing you're closer to the International Space Station than any other human on solid ground, despite being in a country most people can't locate on a map. Here's the mind-bending part. Chimborazo is an active volcano that could theoretically erupt at any time, meaning the farthest point from Earth's center is also a sleeping geological bomb that could reshape this entire region with a single eruption, making it simultaneously the most elevated and most dangerous place to stand on the planet. Number 6. Ecuador has more UNESCO World Heritage Sites per square kilometer than any other country, with 4 sites packed into an area smaller than Nevada. The Galapagos Islands are called a unique living museum and showcase of evolution by UNESCO, while Quito's Colonial Center, Cuenca's Historic District, and Sangay National Park all earned World Heritage status, creating an incredible concentration of globally significant cultural and natural sites in one small nation. You won't believe how this happened. Ecuador's unique position straddling the equator, spanning from the Amazon to the Pacific, and sitting on the geologically active Ring of Fire, created conditions for extraordinary biodiversity and human cultural development, all within easy traveling distance of each other. The historic centers of Quito and Cuenca are so perfectly preserved that walking through their colonial streets feels like time travel, with Spanish architecture, indigenous markets, and Baroque churches creating living museums where people still conduct daily life exactly as their ancestors did 500 years ago. Sangay National Park encompasses active volcanoes, glacial peaks, and pristine rainforest, all within a single protected area that showcases every major Ecuadorian ecosystem in one breathtaking landscape that changes from tropical jungle to Arctic conditions within hours of hiking. Think most countries struggle to get even one UNESCO site? Ecuador managed to concentrate world-class cultural and natural treasures so densely that tourists can experience 4 different World Heritage sites in a single week-long vacation, making it the most World Heritage-dense destination on the planet. Here's what makes this even more remarkable. These sites represent completely different aspects of human and natural history: evolutionary biology, colonial architecture, indigenous culture, and volcanic geology, proving that Ecuador contains more diverse forms of global significance than countries hundreds of times larger, making it a miniature summary of everything extraordinary about human civilization and natural evolution compressed into one accessible South American nation. Number 5. Ecuador is the only country in South America where you can see the Amazon rainforest, snow-capped mountains, colonial cities, and pristine beaches all in the same day, due to its impossibly compact geography. This geographic miracle exists because Ecuador sits at the intersection of the Andes Mountains, Amazon Basin, and Pacific Ocean, creating 4 distinct climate zones packed into a space smaller than most U.S. states, making it the world's most geographically diverse country per square mile. You heard right, you can literally start your morning watching sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, drive through colonial Quito for lunch, spend your afternoon hiking glacial peaks in the Andes, and end your day camping in the Amazon rainforest, all within 8 hours of driving, experiencing more geographic diversity than most people see in a lifetime of international travel. The elevation changes are so dramatic that you can experience temperature variations of 40 degrees Fahrenheit just by driving for 2 hours, going from sea-level tropical beaches to high-altitude mountain valleys where you need winter clothing at the equator. This creates surreal juxtapositions where people from coastal fishing villages and Amazonian hunter-gatherers can be neighbors, despite living in completely different climatic worlds that feel like separate planets. Picture planning a vacation where your itinerary includes surfing, mountain climbing, cultural tourism, and wildlife watching without ever leaving a single country or traveling more than 300 miles, making Ecuador the ultimate geographic variety pack where every type of landscape and climate exists within easy reach. Here's the logistical miracle. Ecuador's road system connects all 4 regions so efficiently that tour companies offer 4 worlds in one-day packages where travelers experience beach, mountain, colonial, and jungle environments with the same convenience as visiting different neighborhoods in a large city. The geographic diversity is so compressed that Ecuador's weather reports include tropical, temperate, alpine, and desert conditions simultaneously, making it the only country where you need to pack for 4 different climates when traveling domestically, creating a travel experience that feels like visiting an entire continent condensed into a single, perfectly organized nation. Number 4. The center of the Earth isn't actually in Ecuador, and the famous Equator Monument is built 240 meters from the real equatorial line, because 18th century scientists miscalculated the exact location. The Mitad del Mundo monument attracts millions of tourists who take photos straddling what they think is the exact center of the Earth. But GPS technology revealed that the true equatorial line runs through a small museum 240 meters away, making one of South America's most famous tourist attractions a geographically inaccurate monument to scientific measurement error. You won't believe how this mistake happened. French scientists in 1736 used primitive surveying equipment to calculate the equator's location, and their measurements were incredibly accurate for the technology available, missing the true line by less than 3 football field lengths across a planet with a 40,000-kilometer circumference, which is actually a remarkable achievement that was only proven wrong 270 years later. The real equator runs through the Intinan Solar Museum, where visitors can perform impossible-seeming experiments like balancing eggs on nail heads and watching water drain straight down instead of spiraling, demonstrating how the Coriolis effect actually works at zero latitude in ways that seem to defy physics. Think this embarrassing error was covered up? Ecuador turned the mistake into a tourist attraction, with visitors now able to visit both the false equator monument and the true equator museum, creating twice the photo opportunities and educational experiences while teaching people about the evolution of scientific measurement techniques. Here's the fascinating part. The original monument still demonstrates important equatorial phenomena like equal day and night lengths throughout the year and unique shadow effects during equinoxes, making it scientifically interesting even though it's not precisely positioned on the equatorial line. The measurement error actually created a perfect metaphor for human scientific progress. Our ancestors made incredibly sophisticated calculations with primitive tools, and their mistakes were actually extraordinary achievements that later technology refined rather than replaced, showing how science builds upon previous discoveries rather than discarding them entirely. Some tourists now specifically visit both locations to experience the difference between 18th century and 21st century scientific precision, making Ecuador's equatorial error one of the world's most educational geographic attractions. Number 3. Ecuador's indigenous populations still control over 60% of the country's land through a complex system of communal ownership that makes them more powerful than the national government in vast rural areas. Indigenous communities like the Shuar, Achuar, Quichua, and dozens of smaller groups maintain traditional governance systems that operate parallel to Ecuador's official government, creating a unique dual sovereignty system where indigenous law often takes precedence over national law, in ancestral territories covering millions of hectares. You heard right, these communities don't just own their land, they govern it through traditional councils, spiritual leaders, and consensus-based decision-making that has survived 500 years of colonization, and now coexists with modern Ecuador's democratic system in ways that anthropologists study as examples of successful indigenous political autonomy. Under Article 57.7 of Ecuador's constitution, indigenous communities have the right to free prior informed consultation on any projects affecting their territories, and they receive 10% of mining revenues from projects on their lands, giving them unprecedented legal power to approve or reject development projects that multinational corporations and even the national government cannot override. The land tenure system is so complex that some areas have never been surveyed by the national government, existing as indigenous territories that appear on no official maps, but are precisely defined by traditional knowledge passed down through generations of oral history. Picture vast regions of Ecuador where indigenous languages are spoken more than Spanish, where traditional healing practices operate alongside modern medicine, and where ancient agricultural techniques still feed communities that have maintained sustainable relationships with their environment for thousands of years. Here's the political reality that most people don't understand. When international mining companies or oil corporations want to operate in Ecuador, they often spend more time negotiating with indigenous leaders than with government officials because indigenous communities have legal veto power over development projects that could affect their territories. This indigenous land control system has made Ecuador one of the most politically complex countries in Latin America, where national sovereignty is shared between the official government and traditional indigenous authorities, who collectively control more territory than the state directly administers. Number 2. Ecuador produces more cacao per hectare than anywhere else on Earth, and Ecuadorian chocolate is considered so genetically superior that European chocolatiers pay premium prices for beans they claim taste fundamentally different from any other chocolate in the world. Ecuador grows national variety cacao that contains genetic markers found nowhere else on Earth, creating chocolate with floral and fruity notes that chocolate experts describe as completely unique, making Ecuadorian cacao the most expensive and sought-after chocolate raw material in the global luxury market. You won't believe how scientifically different this chocolate is. Genetic analysis shows that Ecuadorian national cacao diverged from other chocolate varieties thousands of years ago, creating biochemical compounds that produce flavors impossible to replicate with other cacao genetics, making it literally a different substance than the chocolate most people have ever tasted. The finest Swiss, Belgian, and French chocolatiers specifically import Ecuadorian beans and pay 300 to 500% premium prices compared to African or Central American cacao because the flavor profiles are so distinctly superior that chocolate connoisseurs can identify Ecuadorian chocolate in blind taste tests with near-perfect accuracy. Ecuador's cacao grows in volcanic soil enriched by mineral deposits from active volcanoes, combined with perfect rainfall, humidity, and temperature conditions that exist nowhere else on Earth, creating agricultural conditions that produce chocolate raw materials that are chemically impossible to duplicate in other regions. Think this is just marketing hype? International chocolate competitions are dominated by bars made from Ecuadorian beans, with some varieties selling for over $200 per pound in specialty markets because the genetic distinctiveness creates flavors that chocolate experts describe as wine-like complexity impossible to achieve with any other cacao varieties. Here's the economic irony. Ecuador exports most of its premium cacao as raw beans to European countries that turn it into expensive finished chocolate, meaning the country that grows the world's best chocolate doesn't capture the full value of its agricultural miracle, creating a classic example of how developing countries export raw materials while developed countries add value and capture profits. Some Ecuadorian chocolate companies are now creating finished products that compete directly with European brands, using the same national beans that previously were shipped overseas, but marketing Ecuadorian-made chocolate as a premium product that represents the complete bean-to-bar experience in the country that produces the world's most genetically unique cacao. Number 1. Ecuador is disappearing into the Pacific Ocean due to massive tectonic forces, and the entire country is being pushed eastward while simultaneously being crushed between oceanic and continental plates in a geological process that could dramatically reshape South America within the next million years. The Nazca Plate is subducting beneath the South American plate directly underneath Ecuador at a rate of 5 to 7 centimeters per year, creating intense geological pressures that make Ecuador one of the most seismically active places on Earth, with the entire country essentially being ground up between massive tectonic forces that are literally consuming the land beneath Ecuadorians' feet. You won't believe how violent this geological process is. Ecuador experiences over 1,000 detectable earthquakes per month, with the constant tectonic pressure creating the Andes Mountains, while simultaneously pushing the entire country eastward and generating volcanic activity that could devastate major cities at any moment. The subduction zone off Ecuador's coast is so geologically intense that it generates some of the world's most powerful earthquakes, including the 1906 earthquake that killed over 1,000 people and was felt as far away as Japan, demonstrating how Ecuador's geological instability affects the entire Pacific Ring of Fire. This tectonic collision is creating new land through volcanic activity while destroying existing coastline through subduction, meaning Ecuador is simultaneously growing and shrinking as geological forces reshape the country's very existence in real time, making it one of the most geologically dynamic places on the planet. Picture living in a country where the ground beneath your feet is being crushed, folded, melted, and reformed by geological processes so powerful that they're creating mountains, generating earthquakes, and producing volcanoes that could change the landscape overnight, making everyday life in Ecuador a constant interaction with planetary forces that operate on timescales that dwarf human civilization. Here's the mind-bending reality. The geological processes currently reshaping Ecuador are the same forces that created the Galapagos Islands, built the Andes Mountains, and continue to generate the biodiversity and geographic diversity that makes Ecuador unique, meaning the same tectonic violence that threatens the country is also the creative force that makes it one of Earth's most remarkable places. Scientists estimate that within 50 million years, the ongoing tectonic collision could completely transform the geography of Western South America, potentially creating new mountain ranges, closing ocean basins, and generating geological features that could make current Ecuador unrecognizable, meaning Ecuadorians are living on one of the most geologically temporary pieces of land on Earth, experiencing a planetary transformation that will continue long after human civilization has evolved into something completely different. So we've just discovered Ecuador's most mind-bending secrets, from nature having legal rights to an entire country slowly disappearing into the Pacific Ocean. Which one shocked you the most? Subscribe for more hidden truths that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about our planet.